Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Glad to have you on board, and if you're wondering what you've gotten stumbled into, well, this show is all about the technical research involved with vertebrate pest control. So we want to ask the lack of ordinary questions, the information that you're not going to necessarily get from a traditional training podcast. So as you can tell today, we have a special guest. His name is Sheldon Dillingham. He is the owner of Avitrol Corporation, and his website is avitrol.com. Now, if you're not familiar with Avitrol, Avitrol is a chemical frightening product that's used to frighten flocks away from areas where they're not wanted. So a lot of you are going to think of it, well, that's a avicide. No, it's not designed as an avicide. It does have some avicidal properties, but that's not its primary goal. And we're going to talk more about that today. And so we're really glad to have you, Sheldon, joining us today on the Living the Wildlife podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate it. As you know, Tashina, my wife as well, is very much involved in what we do. And one of the earliest memories that I have back relating with you, because we have worked on different things over the years and talked over the years for different things, is one of the articles I think that you had written. This was actually, we had just bought it, I think maybe 15 years ago or something, and fairly close to that. You had put something out. And this was before we got a lot of the stewardship stuff in place and the training stuff and then all of that stuff in place. And you were still able to kind of see through some of the noise a little bit.
Yeah.
Hold on, guys.
Let's wait.
There's a lot of misuse happening right now. If you just did this, then it would be okay. It's these bad actors. It's not all of it. And so I'm grateful for that. And so that's why. You reached out and I was like, man, I'd love to be on with you. So,
well, I am really glad. You're dating me now. This is way back when I was back in Nebraska. I'm always concerned about losing product, and I was scared because there was talk. I mean, for whatever it's worth, rumors are rumors, right? But there was talk that Avitrol would go away, and I'm like, what? And I was grateful that someone came in. Ultimately, it was you came in and I'm going to call it rescue. That's my word. Rescue the company, or at least keep it from going away, because we have so few products in vertebrate pest control, and I am loath to lose anything right now, and unfortunately that's what's happening. So yeah, and you've raised that issue. I mean, historically Avitrol has gotten a really an unfortunate reputation with people using it hot, right? I mean, so why don't you talk about that evolution with you purchased the company and how you took it to a different place today.
A lot of us banging our head against the brick wall and finding out which bricks hurt less. Is probably my wife and I came into the industry from outside the industry years ago. She worked for Avitrol for about 4 years, 4 or 5 years. I did some stuff, attended some trade shows, and did some things there, for Avitrol, kind of on the side as I was working. My background is actually in technology. That's actually where my formal education comes from. And so we were able to kind of combine some of that with some of the modern tech and some of the things that were happening there with the biotech side of it that we were already navigating. But really what we ran into across the board, and honestly, like company size here didn't matter, is irrelevant. There were so many people with where their degree of training was, here's a box, read the label. My supervisor handed this to me, said, here's a box, read the label, and we all know how well that works.
Right.
And so honestly, that was the biggest thing that we ran into, especially early on, where people were just not trained.
Yeah.
And so they're just kind of making do with what they can. I think some of the smaller percentage stuff, this is a little bit later on, would be um, there needed to be some imposed stewardship on that, and it did layered over in addition to the training.
Yeah.
Part of that had to do with the fact that corporate is going to spend a ton of money the training guys and maybe even flying guys to places to train and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, when that service specialist is on the roof for something, and it's at night or it's 5 o'clock in the morning and it's 20 degrees outside, and the wind is blowing, they're going to do whatever they want to. Much to corporate chagrin.
Yeah.
And so, that's probably the smaller percentage issue.
Yeah.
But we ran it. That's kind of the two sides of the coin, basically, with a couple of the issues that we ran into, I think, earlier.
So let's to kind of, for those in our audience who don't know, aren't familiar, because a lot of people in the wildlife control field don't have pesticide licenses, and shame on you, you should get one. That's me. Get your pesticide license, if nothing else, just as a backup to be able to use products, because Avitrol is an RUP, a restricted use pesticide. So describe what the product is and what its primary, what its classic use case is. And then I would like you to move into, 5 myths that you would like to dispel about the product that people believe that is really a distortion of what the product is or does.
Yeah. So essentially, the modus operandi of the product here is we need to change the way that birds are communicating about a location. And so it works by changing the way that birds are fundamentally communicating about a location. Every flock of birds has a series of alpha birds that are, integrated into the flock. This is the reason why birds can sort of change directions at the drop of, like, flocks of birds can change directions at the drop of a hat. There are scientific studies that show that, a flock of starlings, when you see those large murmurations, that like one bird is communicating to, the surrounding 6 or 8 birds. It's this really amazing, incredible, complex network where they are communicating so they can move essentially almost as one body. And it's thought that the reason why those murmurations happen is because, there's a predator nearby or something like that, particularly predator bird, and it confuses that bird, right? Where they can't actually get in there and go after one of those birds, because it feels like, I've actually in the field stood in the middle of, I had to sneak up to do this at, this was probably like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And so the starlings were actually roosting in a field of trees. And I was able to very quietly sort of sneak up, in there and sort of stir them up basically in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And it actually feels like you are encountering one large wild animal. It actually smells like a large wild animal. It was pretty shocking to me, the first time I did it, And so anyway, all that being said, so they communicate, and so the reason why, you'll go to, let's say, a shopping center, and the shopping center on one side of the street, there's no birds, and the shopping center on the other side of the street is just covered up in birds, is because you've got your alphas, and they're looking at it and they're saying, this is not safe, like this thing and this thing and this thing. And oftentimes it's not things that we are paying attention to if we've got an untrained eye. But they're saying that's a risk there, that's a risk there, that's a risk there. They're looking for food, water, and harborage, and they're looking for things that are very, very safe to attain those things. And so one of the common mistakes that we even see is, like, guys will think, well, man, why should the bird, so what we've got is a grain bait, and so it's like, why should the bird actually eat this grain over the grain spillage that's out here, or
Mm,
the French fries that are sitting on the ground, or whatever it is,
yeah,
And one of the things that we commonly train on is we're like, listen, like you could put filet mignon down there, on the ground in an unsafe place and put corn up right next to a bird at a place where it's already flagged as being a safe place because that's where it's hanging out and it's going to eat that corn before it goes after that, delicious whatever that is down there.
yeah. So
Um,
that bird has to balance the threat benefit ratio,
that's
basically,
it.
is what you're saying. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I love the way you phrase that Avitrol affects the way birds communicate about a location. I don't think I've ever heard that
Mhm.
phrased that way before. I like the way that sounds. So Avitrol interferes with that. And how does it interfere with that?
Yeah, so what it does is it temporarily affects the bird's central nervous system. And what it does is it really, honestly, we're using their own natural biology and communication process to work in our favor. Like, when they're out of sight, like um, they've decided this is a safe place. We should reproduce here. We should eat here. We should all of those things or whatever. So it's working against us, right? That's the reason why they're there. And then they communicate, and like if they're a migrating flock, then they come back to the same place over and over and over again. They bring their
Right.
friends with them,
Yeah.
and yeah, right. They
Why
reproduce.
mess with a good thing?
Yeah, right. Exactly, right.
Right.
Especially too. I mean, if you really think about it, especially around humans and wildlife, and I know you get into this probably with the show. It's not like, if I'm a bird, it's not like there's just this unlimited space for me to find food, water, and harborage. Like, particularly as cities are developing and all these other things are happening, right? So as those places develop, they're going to triple down, like on those places where it's like, hold on, you've got me a great food source here. I've got easy water. I mean, even little things like condensation drip from HVAC units on the top of
Right.
the,
Yeah.
or puddles from pooling water from rain. So it temporarily affects the central nervous system, which is the same thing that triggers fight or flight, right? So really, essentially, the reason why they're hanging out at the site and they flagged as a safe place is because fight or flight isn't being triggered. There's no danger there. So we just have to get them to associate the site with danger, which, by the way, this is the reason why, we'll be talking to end customers, like not just service providers, but end customers, whether it be a food processing plant, maybe plant supervisor or whatever, maybe it's a Q&A guy, or something like that. Following up on something, like if maybe there was a baiting treatment that's proposed and they decide they want to try something else or whatever, and it'll be like, this actually just happened within the last few weeks. Like, it was a plant that we had talked to last year, and they decided they wanted to go with something like sonic repellers or something like that. They wanted to give that a shot or whatever. And I'm not throwing stones at a particular
Ugh.
per se, but
But yeah.
if the shoe fits, just go there.
Yeah.
Um, but I have enough pictures. I have enough pictures that PMPs actually send me a bird sitting on top
Yes.
of the units with droppings all over them. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but in either case, um, they were like, "Yeah, we tried it and it worked for 2 weeks." And then well, it's like, yeah, because, and this is true about a lot of the methods deployed when you talk about birds.
Yeah.
Again, if they have found that perfect combination of food, water, harborage, it will either all three of those things or two out of three or one of the three or whatever it is, they're going to hunker down in there. There's a reason why if we try to exclude them, oftentimes they will just move to another spot where they can't be excluded, like unless
Right.
there's,
Yeah.
um, because that opportunity is still there for them. So affects that central nervous system, triggers fight or flight. That those alphas are now communicating, hey, this is not a safe place. This is a part of the reason why pre-baiting is required, because that's what makes for an effective communication. Otherwise, without the pre-baiting, aside from any kind of potential risk of something else getting into it, which I
Yeah.
can talk about how we keep that from happening now too.
Mhm.
Um, they'll they will communicate there's something wrong with the food that we're eating instead of there's something wrong with the location. It's like they have this little checklist in their brain or mental checklist where they go, well, I did that and that didn't change. I did that and that didn't change. I did that and that didn't change. Okay, it must be something wrong with the site. We must be being attacked or something.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I've been through one of your trainings, and so you're either I forgot or some of this information is even new to me. So, which is really cool. So, just to summarize, so we have Avitrol now as you're changing how the dominant birds are communicating with the flock about whether things are copacetic or not, and it's Avitrol tells them it's not copacetic, and so by stimulating their CNS, so now that's distributed to the flock. So then they imprint the fear to that location, and then they just don't want to come back because it's like, I guess,
Yeah.
burned into their neurons, for lack of a
Yes.
better word, and it's just like
Yeah.
that spot's dangerous.
Yeah, right. Like, this is, I think, how survival works. I mean, even like dominant species that don't have natural predators stay away from places that are, that they consider to be unsafe. Like they're looking for an ideal location. And it's the same thing with these birds. In fact, we've actually seen in the field, we've actually watched flocks of birds split up mid-air as they fly over a location and regroup on the other side. That's how strong of a negative reaction we've actually seen and
That's
witnessed.
bizarre. Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
So
it's
that's
pretty crazy.
amazing. So
Now,
if you had treated it, let's say you're treating a 3 or 4 story building, and you did your baiting on the surface, so when the birds are flying over, they'll split the flock to kind of give birth to the building and then recollect at the other end. That is
we've seen that
amazing.
before. Yeah,
That's
it's pretty
amazing.
crazy.
All
I
right.
won't say that happens every time, but we've
Yeah.
observed it and we've been like, oh my gosh, wow, like these birds really, really, there were some really effective communicating in this particular flock.
Okay. So what are five, like, I'm just throwing out five. You're
Yeah.
free to use less or more. I don't want to box you in here because I'm putting you on the spot. What are some myths that you would like to dispel for our audience that people have about Avitrol that they need to that's a distortion of what the product actually is?
Absolutely. Like I think there's like a lot of like little subsidiary things that I could mention and they're probably Googleable, if that's a word. If not, I just
Sure. Yeah.
but I think the biggest misconception is that Avitrol is a product and not a system. Um, that is probably the largest misconception, and that feeds all of the subsidiaries. It feeds misuse. It feeds all of that kind of stuff. Right. So like as teams are working with our team, one of the things that we provide them with, and this is like free of charge type stuff, is we provide them with an op sheet or an operation sheet. And this gets so specific that it gets down to like how much bait goes in each individual baiting tray and when that should go in there. And I'm talking about down to the decimal point, both during the pre-baiting process and the active baiting process.
Wow. How do you
Yes.
have time for all that?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So
exactly. I
I'm
mean,
like,
it's
wow.
that's what our bird specialists will do. Like, so if
Okay.
someone is having that conversation and they're saying, hey, I've got this parking garage or I've got this hotel in Vegas or whatever the thing is, that's having this bird issue, can you help me? Like our team will do both the sales and the ops side. Like it's like our team creates proposals, we'll help price the whole thing, we work with companies on their company hourly rate, like all that kind of stuff. If they need materials for the pitch, all that, we'll do that. We've actually done co-pitches with companies too. So our team is trained to close bird work, in addition to make sure that the ops side can actually execute the bird work once it's sold.
Yeah.
And so a lot of teams, the reason why their bird process doesn't scale is because they don't have a bird process to begin with. It's like the customer asked me about, whatever it is. I didn't want to lose my customer. So I said yes to this thing or whatever. And I just kind of jumped into it or whatever.
Right.
And now I'm buying boxes and I'm just kind of glancing at the label and I'm trying to make sure I'm, staying okay and all this stuff. But truly, if you're really anything you're doing is going to be a system, but for sure, if you're working with chemicals that were developed through a scientific process for a very specific scientific purpose.
Mhm.
And so you need a system of implementation. That sounds maybe daunting, like if someone hasn't ever gone through that before, but we walk guys through the process. But the end result is these guys, as they're working through and using the system, is guys will go in and they will do these treatments in very, very sensitive areas with no incident, oftentimes with no mortality at all.
It's
Very
amazing.
happy customers and a recurring setup for recurring revenue. Um, and there's a really clear line between the guys that are doing that and working directly with us on those types of programs and have a system in place, and the guys that don't. The guys that don't, honestly, if you Google an incident and it shows up like anywhere, they weren't working with us. And I can say that with surety, like time and time and time again. Um, Now, I will also say, just talk about misconceptions. Um, Getting a little more granular here. You do have to be careful. Like if you're Googling something, the information that you see. Like we ran into this in an incident recently on the East Coast where the news media was reporting all sorts of stuff, and we got on with the PMP and found out that the whole thing was a witch hunt. I mean, like it was like they were pulling out documents, they were showing so like, no, we did this, so we did this. And then what we also found, we love regulators if you're listening, so that's awesome. We help a lot of regulators.
Sure.
But we did also find that, even the state regulators that they were working with didn't know the regs, so
Yeah.
they were quoting stuff and saying stuff, and it was like our regulatory team actually had to get into the middle of it and say, no, 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 here, listen. Yes, this bird is technically protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but it actually falls under the depredation order. They don't
Yep.
need a permit on the front side. Look at your state regs. Your state
Right.
regs say that you default to the Migratory Bird Treaty. The federal, you don't default to like your own separate thing, which means then that this depredation order requires reporting by like January 31st, the following calendar year. They actually have 8 months to report these incidents. And by the way, that's only like birds that have actually fallen.
Yep.
That same reporting requirement is also like on anything that you're going to do in bird, by the way. Like, so
Yeah.
I've actually seen, guys, this actually happened in Nevada, I believe. Like, it was a hotel treatment, and they were like hanging net, and they actually got fined for killing Brewer's blackbirds. Right? Like, yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, like who knew? Or guys going up there and again, you just see this kind of stuff. Guys are going up, they're pulling nests, they're not looking at stuff or whatever, right? Probably not running the right PPE either. That's
Mhm.
a whole other topic.
That's a whole other world. Yeah, we'll
Whole
we'll
other topic.
sidestep that.
Yeah, right. But like not knowing like bird identification and nest identification, they'll get in there and they'll pull some nest or whatever, and it's like, guys, you realize that like the egg in the nest, like if it's a protected bird, it's just as protected as a full grown
That's right.
bird.
Yeah.
And some of these birds are actually brood parasites too, right? Like they will lay eggs in the net, or sometimes they'll take over another nest
Yeah,
even.
the
And
brown-headed
so,
cowbird. Yeah.
yeah, right. Yeah. So like, they might get in there and pull something in there, and it's like you actually have a requirement to report
Yes.
those eggs. And if it gets found out, I mean, we could be talking about $100,000 fine per incident. I
Yeah.
actually I think for organizations it's up to $200,000.
Oh
Like,
my gosh, yeah.
yeah,
But just to sort of recap for those of you that are
yeah,
sort of feeling a little lost on the bird world, what Sheldon is referring to is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which says that all native migratory birds are protected under a federal treaty with Mexico, Canada, and I believe even Russia and Japan now are signatories. So what this means is you are not allowed to harm these birds or take is one of the official words, take these birds without a permit. But there is an exception clause for some of the blackbirds, what's called a standing depredation order, and you have to meet certain criteria. And one of those is if you do harm one of those birds under the standing depredation order, you're supposed to report that information yearly to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And if you're doing that, they have the right to visit you and inspect your property where you're treating at any reasonable hour. So you get some privileges, but you also lose some privacy with it as well. And so he's saying, look, whether you're using a net, a lot of people, it's one of my pet peeves. Let me just go on a rant here. When people think everything, just because you're putting up a net means it's automatically non-lethal.
Yes,
No,
right.
it can be non-lethal, but it may be less lethal because, as you mentioned, birds may be getting trapped inside and all kinds of things. So we may do a podcast on the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in the future, but that we're just going to put a parentheses around that. Make sure you follow the law, folks.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll add to it as well, just real quick so the depredation order, it's blackbirds, cowbirds, grackles, magpies, crows, and I think I'm missing one other bird in there.
Grackles?
I think I mentioned
Did you mention grackles?
Yeah, I'd have to look. I'd have to pull up. There's one other in there.
Okay.
But yeah, that is your exception clause, and it's actually astounding to me how few know about that clause.
I think I need to do a deep dive on that because it is confusing, and so I fully understand why some of your state regulators aren't familiar with some of this, because most of the center of gravity in pesticide regulation is means and bugs. The reality is vertebrate control is an afterthought. That's where the money is, and so it makes complete. So when they get a complaint, they may not know how to handle that, and it's out of their bailiwick.
And I will definitely say again, man, to reiterate, like, we love working with regulators. There are a ton of them from like basically every state in the country, like on our email list and all that. So I mean, like, we've actually had them, if they suspect a violation, we've had them actually reach out to us to ask questions, and we will help with all of that kind of stuff because we want to make sure that they make the right call as well. And so I would actually encourage, if you happen to be a regulator that stumbled across the show or you're listening or something, feel free to reach out. Like, we've trained and certified regulators before.
Great.
We're more than happy to do that. That's not a big deal at all.
Yeah. So you talked about how the myth number one is Avitrol the myth is it's a product, not a system. So the positive side is Avitrol is part of a system of bird control. The second issue is be careful of your Google search learning about Avitrol, and that these incidents may not have been reported correctly, or there may have been an issue of misuse. It could go either way, or both and. Do you have a third potential myth that people are often struggle with? I would think maybe for those of us who are older who remember the pre-15 years ago dates.
Yes, so the subsidiary, like the elephant in the room, so to speak, right? That would be like, okay, if I use this, I'm raining birds out of the sky, or I'm killing birds, and that's my overall objective as I navigate it. Most of the treatments that we navigate are not that. In fact, you might be shocked. We've reduced the use of active ingredient. I mean, not the formulation hasn't changed, but just the use of active ingredient. We've reduced by probably about 75%, like over the last 15 years.
That's amazing.
And simultaneously, there are more treatments going on than ever in the history of Avitrol biotechnologies. So how we've done that has been helping guys with their mixture ratio. The thing is all we need to do is get these primary birds communicating. That's it. We don't need every bird in the flock, trying to communicate. We don't even need like 20% of the birds in the flock trying to communicate at all whatsoever. Um, and so what we found to be really effective is a 1 to 40 dilution ratio, 1 part treated to 40
Okay.
parts untreated. So 41 total parts. What we've also found is that like granule size matters too. So now one of our most popular products is the mixed grains product. So let me back up just a little bit. We
Hmm.
released a product called Easy Blend, which is
Yeah.
yes. So it's
It's
a pre-measured.
pre-mixed. Yep.
That's right, pre-measured product, measured directly from us, like at our factories, and basically it's got your untreated and it's got your treated in there. You you open it up, you dump a jar in, mix it up, and it's a perfect 1 to 40 blend. We did that because what we found is that rather than using outside of messing up dilution ratios or not diluting correctly
Right.
or at all, so
Or at all. Right.
that's a label violation, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, right.
You've been listening to an interview that I did with Mr. Dillingham, who is the owner of Avitrol, which is a chemical frightening device. This was the end of part 1. He gave us a hour-and-a-half marathon interview. So stay tuned. The next episode will be part 2 of our 3-part series with Mr. Dillingham. We're really grateful that he came on to our show. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel. Give us a 5-star review if you liked it. And if you're wondering what this was all about, well, this is the Living the Wildlife podcast, and we're part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. We're dedicated to providing research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest control. So, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to get your thoughts, comments, maybe suggestions for future shows. Maybe you would like to be on the show, just like Mr. Dillingham came onto the show. And no, it doesn't cost anything. We want to get information out to the public on vertebrate pest management. So again, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. And you've been listening to Living the Wildlife. Why is it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. So stay tuned for next week. We'll get to part 2. Thanks for watching. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast with Living the Wildlife Podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.